Hey, what's up? Dave with Brazos Valley Strength, and welcome to, I guess we'll call this the first official coaching video from the new gym, the new studio here. So today, I want to talk about head position and how that affects the positions that you can get into and overall the force output that you can have and hopefully increase your strength in squats and deadlifts. I'm mostly going to focus on deadlifts. All of this stuff I think will be framed around the sumo deadlift for sure. I'm going to bring it back to squatting here in the end of the video. I won't talk about conventional all that much. I just don't think that there's quite as many options for conventional as far as the positions that we can get in for most people and still be optimized for individual leverages. But I will talk about stiff leg deadlifts a good bit. So I think that that can very much apply. And everything I say in here is still going to be true for conventional. The first thing, I want to make sure we're speaking the same language. So if I'm talking about up or down or just neutral, it's going to be relative to your trunk angle. So if I'm in a squat, you can see we'll call that like a 45-degree angle of my trunk at this point. Neutral is going to be the back of my head, just my overall head, but I think looking at the back is the easiest. My head in line with my trunk. So at this point, it's slightly down, but it's neutral to my body. So I think that's gonna be really important, especially in sumo, because the degree of angle of the posture of the trunk can be very, very different. Everybody's gonna get inclined squatting, so we'll see later how that really impacts things, but neutral is going to be compared to the trunk angle. So we want to look at what advantages we might get from both and the downsides, because there are both. And the take-home message here is going to be that there are people who fit both categories very, very well, but I will have recommendations for a lot of people. So let's start with head up. And again, we're starting with sumo. So when we bias towards a more head up position in sumo, what we're going to generally find with this is that we get a lot more extension from our upper back, and we're going to tend to shorten the arms a little bit. And I actually think that this is a pretty interesting tool, and it's a pretty easy representation on the video here. You can see by me just changing my head angle, how much my arms change. And I'm on it, you can try this at home. I honestly was doing this very, very deliberately, not moving anything else except really dropping, kind of forcing my head, my gaze down, and then really pulling it up. And you can see how much my arm, it's protraction and retraction essentially here, but the angle or the elevation of my hands and my shoulders relative to the barbell, it's a pretty dramatic difference. And so you can very easily see that me rotating my head up gets me more extension in my upper body. And that might be really, really powerful for a lot of people. I think that most people, when we get to the heaviest loads, are going to find that they need some extra extension strength. That regardless of posture, we're still going to be limited at the very top end by our upper back strength. I don't think that's a problem. I've talked about this a good bit, that I think that most people, most very good deadlifters, are going to be failing the deadlift at the top. So if we're making decisions, trying to make it to our deadlift is stronger off the floor, oftentimes we may be losing overall strength. Failing at the top is not necessarily a bad thing, but that is going to be where we need to start looking for extra little bits of strength to be able to maximize the most force production we can have and ultimately lift the most weight that we possibly can. But as I said here, I do think that many, many people can really bias towards this stuff way too much early on. I think that this is probably the more common beginner mistake, that people are really cranking their heads back to get more from their upper back, and they're trying too hard to get too extended because they feel like their back is weak or whatever, when really it's maybe just like a leverage slack pull issue. But also with this, with the head up too much and too much extension going on here, the hips very likely are going to end up further back from the bar, and our hips, because of the extension, are not going to have the space to be able to get very close to the bar. So the head down can potentially solve a lot of those issues. To where my head being more down is going to relax some of those upper back muscles, specifically the traps and everything, going to help relax those upper back muscles and make my arms a good bit longer and create a whole lot more space for my lower body to rotate and hopefully to emphasize protraction rather than flexion. I have a recent video on that I think was pretty popular and pretty well received. So if you need more context on what we're trying to get out of the upper back, I'd very highly recommend that video. But those positions, generally speaking, are going to lean into a little bit more efficiency overall, but oftentimes create more of those issues at the very top end with the upper back. So a balance between here can be very, very powerful. I do think, like I said, that many people can be very successful with both of these tools, but I think most of the time people will find that especially with lighter loads and especially with warm-ups, they can really lean into the benefits, the value that they get from that more loose, relaxed upper body position and really learn how to wedge their lower body into the bar, create that space, and create a very natural slack pull with those long arms. And then as the load increases, we can start bringing the head up a little bit more. We can start working for a little bit more back extension. And then most of the time, I think very broadly, if you look at the best deadlifters in every class, most of the time people are really going to be fighting to have their heads up. There are exceptions, of course there are, but when those weights are very, very heavy, we have to have all these things going together. We have to have the long arms, we have to have the close hips, we have to create that posture that's efficient, and also be ready to work to limit that back flexion that hopefully was illustrated well in the protraction versus flexion video. But I do think that it's very, very important for any of this really to work well, that people have good management of what their trunk is doing in general, and the ability to hinge, and just be able to coordinate all of these things together. Because I think very, very often, like I said, newer lifters who maybe don't have good awareness of what their trunk is doing, they fight for that head up position because it really feels like extension. It feels like you're managing your trunk pretty well. And I think we've all seen videos of lifters pulling with the head way up and a very rounded back and things going very poorly there. So I think for any of this to work in the first place, you have to be able to do a good stiff leg deadlift or a good Romanian deadlift and keep your head neutral. This is something that I work with every single one of my clients, every client that I've ever worked with. I've at some point had RDLs and stiff leg deadlifts, and I'm positive I've coached almost everybody towards a neutral position. If they haven't proven that they can maintain that posture and maintain management of their back in that neutral position with their head in line with their trunk, I don't think these other tools are going to be valuable at all. We have to learn that awareness first, and then we can bring in all of the other stuff. And it can be very, very effective to help push people in the direction that essentially they need. If somebody is biased towards a more squatty position, too extended, just a little bit too hips back, we can go head down a little bit more, create a little bit more looseness, a little bit more length in the arms, and get those hips a lot closer, and usually it feels a whole lot more efficient. And the same is true in the other direction. If somebody's consistently getting much too rounded, we can just bias towards the head up. And I do think that these things can ebb and flow. For myself, I've been successful in a wide range of different head positions, especially on deadlift. That there's very, very often that I can pull very heavy with my head biased a little bit below neutral because it emphasizes maybe the things I'm not doing well in that moment. So being able to feel my arms longer, get my hips closer, the head being down may accomplish that. But as soon as I get better at those, I'll start bringing it up to get a little bit more extension from my back. And it kind of works both ways. So I think that just kind of understanding the impact here can really help nudge you in the directions that you need really at any time of your lifting. And I think one of the main things that you can see with the head up goes back to my video on slack pull in the first place, which what I said in that video was that we want to have a target point that's a little bit above where the bar is resting on the ground. And so if we just go back to the video of me pulling my head up and how my arms start rising, pulling away from the bar there, you can see that essentially it does that. And so the best image of all of this together, bringing in the head down and working the head up, during the setup, if you allow that head to be down to create a longer arm position and feel your hips being close, we can get to the bar and really leverage into that longer position and then rotate the head up, we can create that effort for more extension and get that higher target point and pull slack and hopefully bring all of this stuff together. And I think that the cueing can be different for each one, that we may need to bias a little bit more like upper body stuff. Sometimes I'll say that we want to pull the chest through the arms, or that I want to lead with my head. Those kind of cues work very well when we need more extension stuff. I recently posted a video titled Peel the Sticker. And so that one was one that was much more biased, especially the time that I needed it. I was working much more towards trying to wedge my hips in. And I think that that creates a very good image as well. But both of these cues, either way, we're always trying to create pressure in both directions. We're always trying to have the upper body stretching very, very far away from the bar and our feet really driving into the floor. So whether we're really cueing the head up and pushing the upper body away or wedging the hips in, I always really like to go back to the image that I always use of Luke Skywalker in the trash compactor and trying to wedge both of those walls away from him. Ultimately, that's what deadlifting feels like, and I think either way we can be successful with either one of these. So let's talk about squats. All the same stuff is true. with squats. We're just gonna have fewer options here. Like I said, with conventional, most people don't have too many options as far as their rotation overall. I think the same is true with squatting, that most people aren't going to have a super wide range of foot positions or toe angles or really how upright they can be. Most people can manipulate those a little bit, but it's just not a ton. So I think that the head angle stuff oftentimes is a little bit more simple for squatting, that we're just biasing it based on kind of where you feel weak at any time. So same things are true here, that the head being down a little bit is going to bias us a little bit more forward. But I think that most of the time that can help us get out of a much too retracted position with the upper body and get us a little bit potentially better brace with the things like rib cage down and all of that. So we can compress a little bit more and bias ourselves that way. But when it gets very heavy, I find that basically everybody is going to have to start working with the upper body again. So pretty much everybody that I work with, if they're not moving super well, if they're overly retracted, I'll cue them to bring their head down so we can get the bracing stuff intact. And I tell almost everybody that as we're going through this process, that I'm cueing the head down right now. As they get those things together and as the weights get heavier, very, very likely the gaze is going to have to come up, because once all of those like cornerstone fundamental things are intact, we're going to have to fight more with the upper body again. That we really need to be able to work against that and essentially have that intent and proprioception to be able to be ready to work against the bar. So what tends to be the most successful balance for most people is that when you're unracking the bar, biasing the eye line down a little bit helps us bias towards a little bit better brace. Once we're unracked and once we're set, now everything is set in stone and we should be able to just fight against the bar a little bit more. The very, very simple way that I would approach this is pick a spot that's either straight out in front of you when you're squatting or slightly down of that neutral kind of midline position. So a lot of times it's like the corner of the wall out in front of you or something like that. Or if you're in a powerlifting meet, it's oftentimes you'll just be making eye contact with the person sitting in the front row, which is always super fun. But looking, essentially at that angle. And then as you squat, that point doesn't change. So at the top, it may be neutral, maybe slightly biased down, but then at the bottom of my squat, that position is going to be up. So the demands at the top of the squat lean more towards me being able to create a better brace and set that stuff up. And at the bottom, it's where I need that demand. I need to be able to fight against the bar and work from my upper back and maintain that posture there and just be ready to just work hard in general. So the eyes being up there tends to be something that works very, very well for most people. So hopefully, what's apparent from this video is that very likely a lot of stuff can work here. And that most of the time we really are just trying to nudge people back towards neutral-ish. And mostly we're just trying to nudge them away from their natural bag habits is really what it's coming down to. So if you're a little bit too flex, nudge those eyes up a little bit. If you're a little bit too extended, bringing them down will likely help you. And it may drift back and forth. Our technique doesn't always stay exactly the same. So understanding what these little nudges can do can really help you move consistently and hopefully maintain the feel of your squat and your deadlift reliably and be strong when you need to. So if that video was helpful, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time.